You're listening to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast, the show with a light-hearted look at the eventing world, all of the big event previews, reviews, and special guests, and of course, backed up with all of the key Echo Ratings stats. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast and a brand new special episode that is all about the absolute eventing legend that is Sir Mark Todd, who this last weekend announced his retirement from the sport. He will be an absolutely huge loss, hugely emotional, bit of a shock, Dan, because, we might have known it was coming, but we certainly didn't know it was coming this weekend.
I didn't know it was coming at all. I don't know where all this is coming from, everybody. Loads of nods and winks that obviously happen in the eventing world way without me. Like, I was absolutely shocked. There was I presumed absolutely going to Tokyo at the very least. And so, yeah, no, it wasn't. I was shocked.
And he is going to be a huge, huge loss. We're going to go on and talk to a few of the key people within his life who have been there through his career. They have been owners, they have been fellow competitors, teammates, and we're going to hear just what they have to say about him.
We just decided they were the key people in his life, Nicole.
Well, yeah, we did. They weren't specific. We thought, who can we talk to about Toddy? And we called in a few favours. We harassed a few people, and this is who we came up with. So you've the likes of Blythe Tate, who has been on many a team with him, winning medals along the way. Tim and Janelle Price, who are both on the podium with him last weekend in Campfire. Pete Cattell, who owns Leonidas and who's owned horses with Toddy for a long, long time. His best man, Derm, you even dug that one out.
Yeah, that was a great one to get. Brendan Corscadden. I must say I was really hopeful of some proper stories from Brendan. But Toddy assures me that Brendan is a safe person to talk to because Brendan will forget all the stories. So actually, Brendan played it pretty cool. But yeah, we're going to hear from him. And finally, Nicole, I got Lucinda Green to talk to us a little bit because don't forget, Lucinda was riding very, very high at the time of Mark's first badminton win and probably Mark's first World Games as well back in 1978. So that was, peak Lucinda time as well. And so yeah, we got her take.
Well, we have been really lucky and they have all got really lovely things to say about him. So let's get started. Let's hear what they have to say.
A critical part of the Mark Todd story is that backing of owners over such a long career. They've played a key part in his success, and I'm delighted to be joined by Pete Cattell. I could introduce you with all of your various titles, Pete, but it's probably fair to say you're best known as the other half of the Di and Pete relationship. And the Di and Pete owner club has been a very strong part of the Mark Todd story, particularly probably in the last 10 years. So to the beginning of it, I think major milestone was probably your first horse with Mark.
Yeah, it was. Well, I should start off by saying it's nice to know that you've put Di first, so it's Di and Pete, because that's probably the right way round. Yeah, I mean, we wrote our dreams down back in sort of 2008-9, and after an aborted start, when I said my dreams was to drink more beer and play more golf, we got serious about it, and one of the things I wrote down was to own a 4-star event horse. And Di said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." Yeah, so it's something that we should do together as a sport. So we found a horse called Major Milestone that had been brought into the UK by Ollie Townend, and then found its way to a guy named Owen Moore. Owen Moore produced it up to 3-star, and we did Blenheim and Bramham in 1 year, 2009. And then Owen said, "Look, this horse needs to go on. It's not with me." And we said, "Well, who should we try?" And he suggested Mark. Now, Mark was always an idol of Diane's, and so to sort of to have that moment of I've now got to contact my idol was an interesting one. Anyway, So after about 25 phone calls of unreplied phone calls, he eventually replied and said, well, bring him down. And Mark was based at Headley Stud Down, just outside Newbury at that stage. So I took Major Milestone Milo down. Mark tried him out and essentially said, I really promised myself when I came back to this sport that I wasn't going to ride difficult horses. And this one's a little bit difficult. So, essentially we were sort of rejected. And then 3 or 4 days later, the phone rang and it was Mark calling Diane. And sort of first question he asked was, is this horse qualified for Burghley? Which it was, because it was, because he'd done Blenheim and Bramham. So he got enough points. And Mark said, well, come on, let's give it a whirl. And our first competition was in July 2010 at Purston Manor. Mark turned up. We took the horse. Mark turned up. He'd got no hat. He'd got no back protector. He'd got no armband. Begged, borrowed and stole some equipment. Did the open novice. We put it on Dan Jocelyn's lorry. Put Milo on Dan Jocelyn's lorry. Took him home. Mark did, I think he did Aston, Gatcombe and Barbary, and went straight to Burghley. And beyond our wildest dreams, we got 11th. And I often joke and say, it's a bit, eventing's a bit like a drug, and really that was our first shot of heroin, and we absolutely loved it. And we've kept taking it ever since. It sort of started the relationship. So we'll be forever grateful to Milo for sort of starting this relationship, and he's still in the field at home, retired now with us. But it got us introduced to Mark, and the sort of rest is history, really, in terms of the horses that we've bought with Mark, the places we've been to, the people we've met, the friendship we've created. And it's a bit of a dream come true, to be honest, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll come on to, because it is the start of a very long-term and special relationship. And, your first drug taking here, when you get that 11th at Burghley, I guess it really steps up a notch in terms of, I'm biased, and I think people know that I'm biased in this regard, but probably one of the most special horses that you've had, and certainly that has been a big part of Mark's more recent career, is the horse that I think follows pretty closely to Major Milestone, and one of a number that you've had with him. But the big one is Leonidas for me, and that would have been probably about 2012. Would that be around right?
Yeah, we have had a number, and I think there's a little known fact that, and I was talking to Graham Tom about this only on Sunday. Mark got an Armada dish at Badminton recently, and that's for five-star completions, and all of those 5 horses were ours. It was a combination of Major Milestone, a horse called Aloha, and more recently Leonidas. Leo came to us through Mark. This was back in started in 2011 when we first started having the conversation. He was a 7-year-old then. We got him vetted in early 2018. He passed the vet. We transferred the money. The following day, he went to Somerford Park and was placed second in a 2-star, old 2-star. So the sort of journey started successfully, and it's just got better from then. We ended the year doing the 3-star long, or 4-star long as it is now, at Buccalo. We all know what a good-looking horse he is and what a big moving horse he is. But what he was able to show was just his scope at cross-country, etc. And I think it's at the time at which Mark was losing Land Vision, Ben, with which he won Badminton in 2012, I think. He got a horse to potentially replace Ben. And he's taken us to some amazing places. We've been to the World Games, we've been to the Olympics. We've had some massive highs and lows, as probably everybody knows, and you guys talk about a lot. But, you know, and I always say with this sport that if you want the highs, then you've got to expect the lows as well. And we've had both in equal measure. To be placed fourth twice at badminton, and a sixth, I think, at badminton as well, and then to, you know, be placed in 3-star longs at Bramham and at Buccleuch, to win at Belton, you know, and there's plenty of highs in there to you know, sort of counteract some of the more challenging moments, shall we say.
Yeah. I'm just looking at Leonidas's record here. It's something that I often stare at and wonder about, because, as you say, he has just had such an incredible run, so many top placings. I'm still shocked that as I'm looking for actual wins, you're going back to Belton in 2014, when you're followed by, you know, some of the top competitions in the world, as you say, badminton, Burley, Rio, Aachen, you know, and he's always been in around that top placing. However, I will not get into a long podcast on Leonidas. Tell me a little bit about one of the things I'm trying to capture on the pod, in terms of this type of pod, is actually that we know about his success, we know about the Olympics, we know about the longevity in the sport, but what's it been like being around him as an owner? So you've mentioned the places that the horses and Mark have taken you, but what's it like, you know, being away with him on camp or at a championship? How close do you hang around with him? You know, tell us a little bit about, I suppose, the real side of being an owner with Mark.
Well, look, I mean, I think I'd probably just say one word, really, which, you know, if you could ever pick one word to summarize one person, and that's generous. You know, he's unbelievably generous. He's generous with his time, you know, not just for us, but for everybody around him, and whether that's other riders, and he gives his time and his advice and his counsel, you know, frequently, and you know, people will ask him for his advice. And when you're in a top class sport like this, you know, sometimes you sort of think, well, maybe they want to keep these ideas and thoughts and to themselves. But Mark, absolutely not. He's generous with his time. He's generous with his, you know, with his hospitality as well. I mean, I think it's sort of fairly legendary, you know, with Mark and amongst the sort of wider New Zealand community, when, you know, almost you sort of create a little corral of New Zealand lorries, and, you know, and you're sort of barbecuing and, you know, having a drink and, you know, sharing time with friends and owners and riders, and, you know, and then sort of that just naturally is a magnet for all of those other people that, you know, he knows and he met, and they sort of come in and have a drink and drift out, and then the next set come in. So he's incredibly generous with his, you know, with his hospitality. And then I think, you know, he's generous with his friendship as well. So, you know, we've spent time with Mark at his home, with his family, with Carolyn and with James and Lauren. You know, he's got a lovely family around him. You know, and that's incredibly important. But he's welcomed us in. You know, so it's and that's just made us feel quite special. And you know, we'll be forever grateful for, you know, for his generosity and for welcoming us in. I mean, it's you know, it's sometimes a strange relationship, you know, owner riders. It's, you know, you sort of, how close do you want to get? You know, do you want to leave them with their own space, etc. But, you know, with Mark, we try and do that. You know, we try and make sure he has his own space. You know, but equally he does invite us in. So, and I go back to, you know, with Diane and him being, you know, someone that was always special to her when she was competing and riding. You know, to then be, you know, in the inner circle of that is a pretty special moment, really.
Yeah, I think that's something which has come across over the last couple of days, and again, as we've spoken to people in the last couple of days for this podcast, that a lot of people, he has the ability to make a lot of people feel very special and very important around him. I think that probably is captured in what you're talking about.
You know, he does have an ability to make you feel that you're the most special person in his life at that moment in time.
Yeah, I know.
You know, and that's a real skill. You know, and you know, he's probably learned it over the years. But it's, you know, it's a real skill and art to be so generous. You know, at that moment in time, and you know, I've seen him a moment we had at Blair Castle a couple of years ago on a horse called Obrius Columbus, and we walked the course, and Mark said, I'm going to take the long route here. Anyway, the horse was going pretty well. He decided to take the short route and came a cropper and took a tumble. So we're sort of there at the moment in time, and he's got the horse, and he's clearly just, sort of a bit down about it. And then all of these children, mothers, span the ages in terms of youth right up to sort of, seniority. They came along, and at a moment when he could have been a little bit grumpy because he'd just taken a tumble, he was just there for them. Can I have my photo? Can I have your autograph? Can I have? Di and I just looked at each other and just like, if that was us, I'd just be wanting to walk away, not Mark. No, yeah. He gave his time freely and willingly, So in the face of adversity, he's still, incredibly generous.
Sunday was an emotional day, Pete. We've talked about Leonidas, and you maybe had a little bit of an inkling as to what else was coming. I was mainly just excited about Leonidas going clear inside the time and the comeback happening. But I'm sure it was a very emotional day as that news became public and as that began to sink in. From the way you're talking, from the length of the time and from the closeness of the relationship that you guys have had with Mark, it's going to have an impact on yourself and Diane in terms of what you do at events and who you walk courses with and who you have a glass of Prosecco with as you sit and wonder about what dressage scores are coming in or what the cross country time is like. I mean, has it sunk in for you guys? I mean, I can tell you're really going to miss him.
Well, look, he'll still be around. He'll still be a friend. There's one thing about friendship is those that are important. They don't give up on you, and you don't give up on them. So, he'll still be a friend, as will Carolyn and the extended family. Yes, Sunday was difficult. It's probably remiss of me to sort of say when we knew, and when we were told that he was going to originally quit. But we did know when, and we managed our expectations accordingly. But on Saturday, we were told by Mark that this was going to be his last event. So it was pretty close to the wire. And he asked us to sort of maintain discretion on that because he wanted to be, he wanted to manage it in terms of informing the New Zealand team, informing the New Zealand Equestrian Federation, and then the sort of wider community. And you could see when it actually happened how big news it was. So he wanted to be in control of that agenda really. And so we were trying to compute this at a time when we couldn't tell anybody, and that was quite difficult. But that was the commitment that we made. As time went on during Sunday, then we were aware that Mark was informing more people, and it was becoming much more common knowledge. And then obviously Graham made the announcement. I won't lie. There were a few tears shed by many people. You can't have a relationship that's been that close, to not get emotional about it. But at that stage, clearly, we weren't thinking about what next, and it was just let's live in the moment, let's reflect, and what will be tomorrow's problem, not today's problem. And so we've had to sort of reconcile ourselves with it, and we'll move on when the time is right. The thing about Sunday was, as it became much more common knowledge, there was a sort of audible gasp when Graham announced it publicly over the public address system. People were coming up to us and sort of hugging us as much as they were hugging Mark. I mean, that was really nice. I mean, I think that's just testament to people knowing what our relationship was like with him, or is like with him. And then obviously those sort of questions start coming in. What are you doing? What are you doing? And my stock answer to that, to be honest, is look, that's tomorrow's problem. Let's just reflect today because it's a special moment and it should be celebrated. And we'll worry about the other stuff at a different time. So yeah, it was a strange weekend. It was a weekend of highs and lows because we had a bit of a hoolie with Cool Tide, Fozzie. We had a great result with Casper, the Grey Horse, Cool Rain, and then Leo did what Leo can only do. And I think few people may know that he's been off for a wee while, having some treatment, and to see him perform in the way that he did and smash it in the dressage and blitz that cross country inside the time. I think one of only 7 times inside the time. To be standing on the podium with Tim and Janelle, and I think that was a really special moment. The sort of 3 senior New Zealand riders, and Mark has been so helpful to Tim and Janelle when they first came over to New Zealand, and to end it standing on top of a podium with the 2 of them, I mean, you just couldn't have written the script.
Yeah, exactly. Pete, thank you for that. And yeah, I just keep thinking about Leo and what comes next, but I am resisting with every single piece of me. I am resisting asking the question about tomorrow's problem, but looking forward to seeing lots more of Leo. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for sharing your memories of Mark and the owner side. We look forward to having you on soon when we get all of the answers to tomorrow's problem, which we will absolutely be ringing you to find out. But for today, thank you very much, Pete.
Well, our next guests on the Mark Todd special episode of the Eventing Podcast are 2 people that know him really well. They're 2 big players in New Zealand eventing. I'm delighted to welcome Tim and Janelle Price. Guys, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
No worries.
And I think it's probably really apt that we've got you guys on because you were a huge part of the sort of the final chapter, so to speak, because you were on the New Zealand Nations Cup team with Toddy this last weekend in Campfire. Tim, just talk to us a second about what it was like, because hugely emotional. I mean, I imagine you knew this day was coming, but when did you guys actually find out that it was happening and that it was this weekend?
Well, this day has been coming for a long time, Nicole. Like, I think we're on round 2 here of Toddy retirements, and yeah, whilst we do think this is definitely it for him, it certainly was just something that is always slightly in the future, and so it was something that's totally up to him. So we don't get too ahead of ourselves or presumptuous as to when it was going to happen. So Campfire to us was just another competition. Janelle and I were both looking forward to catching up with Mark again because he's been a little bit preoccupied with racehorses and things, and so it was quite cool. We've been very, very busy lately, and the idea of going to Campfire and having a Nations Cup team that comprised just the 3 of us, we were really looking forward to. It's a little bit like the old times again. So yeah, we just went out there with looking forward to going through a competition, and so the news definitely actually came as a shock to both of us, didn't it, Janelle? Yeah,
absolutely. He sort of did allude the evening before we were having a barbecue, and he did allude that the news. So it did come as a big surprise, and suddenly it felt like we were sort of riding for a medal or something on the Sunday. Suddenly the pressure went up a bit, but it was really fitting that we were able to pull it off, and like Tim said, it was kind of a bit ironic. It was just the 3 of us, and obviously he's been such a huge part of our careers. It was a real honour to send him off in that fashion.
Was it particularly emotional? Because I'm kind of a little bit torn as to feeling like it's a celebration of his career, because he has, as you say, we kind of knew it was coming at some point, even if we didn't know when, and he's had such an incredible number of big achievements that you don't, while it is massively sad, you kind of don't want to get caught up in that, but you're understandably gutted that you're not going to ride on a team with him in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And for us, it sort of feels like we didn't quite get the end to the fairy tale that we wanted. Obviously that was a team medal. We were so desperate for sort of a team goal to send him off with, and that didn't come to fruition. And So that has been frustrating and certainly played on our minds, and we probably thought that, maybe he was going to eke it out to Tokyo and we still had one more chance. But look, it's not to be. And at the end of the day, like you say, he's signing off a phenomenal career, and he's been so fit and active and healthy. Nobody knew when that day would come, but he's done it in style, much like his career. And, I'm sure he'll have huge success with his racehorses moving forward.
Yeah, I do. And like the emotion of it was from Mark and filtered to everyone else. And that was what was quite special rather than sad. And it obviously meant a lot to him, not just the significance of it, but the actual decision to do it there and now. It was something that he was allowing to happen naturally. And like Janelle says, it's just a true mark of who he is and how he is and everything he does. He's a pretty on the spot kind of guy. He lets things happen in the moment, and so he had made the decision himself, and then we rolled on through to the Sunday, and like Janelle says again, we were hoping for a good result, and we got that, and we came out, and he said, "I'm going to do it," and you just knew that he hadn't actually planned all that those steps until they were actually happening. And in that way it became very emotional, and the way it was for Mark, and then it filtered around, and it was just like I say, very special. And the joy of what he's achieved and the legacy and everything that's to come. But in the moment it was tinged with sadness and just a special moment for everyone that got to share it.
It feels like a very fitting end to his career to be stood on top of a podium as part of a New Zealand team, having won a competition that actually the team ethics, and we'll come on to that in a minute, has been such a huge part of his career on a horse that has had a bit of time away from the sidelines, but has been, again, in Leonidas, a massive part of his sort of second career as such. So it does feel like all of the kind of the pieces of the puzzle kind of slotted into place, and it seems the right time. It would be very easy to keep going and to keep pushing and to keep wondering when is the right time, but hats off to creating it, because actually it did happen all very, very naturally, as you say. Let's go back to the beginning a little bit, because you guys started your careers out in New Zealand. And at that point, Mark was actually retired over in New Zealand. Did he have any kind of impact on you coming over to the UK at all, Janelle? Was that a conversation that you had with him about where you should kind of move forwards?
Not so much. He, after he had retired, I think it was post-Sydney, wasn't it? Post-Olympics, he came back to New Zealand, and he really tried to settle into a sort of non-eventing life, largely, and you have to remember we're from the South Island, Toddy was in the North Island. So it wasn't like we saw him frequently. Certainly, he was around and about, but he wasn't hugely involved. It was sort of at the time that Tim and I were, I guess, becoming sort of big fish in a smaller pond. We were starting to get some consistently, good results over there. And that's when it was sort of proposed to us at the time that we were an outside chance for Athens Olympics. It was in 2003. So that was the main motivator for us coming over. But certainly once the seed was sown, then, we certainly went to Toddy and asked his advice, and he was very supportive. And we actually ended up spending a couple of weeks with him, taking the two horses that we flew to England. So we just had the one horse each. We went and stayed with him at his base in Cambridge in the North Island for a couple of weeks and did a bit of training before we came over. And I remember he gave us a load of rugs and sort of all the stuff he'd brought home from England. So for two little Kiwis that had never seen a Thermatex, it was pretty exciting stuff.
I feel like your journey over to the UK at some point needs to be an entirely different conversation, because I would love to know more about it. But obviously, this is about Mark's influence on it. And coming over to the UK is a huge cost, because you only had the two horses to come over. But you did a lot of work in New Zealand, Tim, before you made the move in order to make it possible. And he was a huge part of that.
Yeah, and he made himself very available for that. And it's a little bit like a lot of what Mark does people and for us and the team and whatever the context might be. It's a lot to do with his actions, and he just demonstrated support for us in many ways, and one of those ways he actually didn't even need to think about coming down to the South Island, jumping on a plane and flying himself down, not uttering a word of who's paying for my flight or anything like that, and joined us in a night fundraiser that we had put on to put some money together to sell some silly bits and pieces where people pay over the odds for what they're getting just to support us and to get some money together, because it was really that kind of thing for us to make it possible, and for us to have a showpiece like Mark Todd coming down to the South Island really got seats on bums, and he obviously knew that
bums on seats.
Seats on bums on seats.
I mean, seats on bums is a whole different thing.
It's a complete different picture, but he was he knew what he could bring, and he did it just by turning up and being there and saying a few words, and so no, that was just really special. We'll never forget that.
And you perhaps have to have an appreciation of the scale of things in New Zealand. I mean, we were in like a retired serviceman's hall auctioning ostrich eggs. I vaguely remember.
Ostrich eggs?
Yes. And that was from my parents' good friend.
And Toddy was obviously, being contacted by, I think it was one of the local pony clubs organisers. So he was contacted out of the blue by some, pony club mother who said, we're doing something to support these guys. Can you come? So, it was certainly an early show of his support, and like Tim says, throughout he leads by example, and there's not many people as successful as Toddy that are as popular as he is.
I still remember him when he was speaking that night, saying that we're worth supporting and to get behind us, and he said, Janelle, she's a very determined young girl, and Tim, if he just started to wear some shoes, he could be all right as well. And he's always had a touch of humour with everything, and never lost that's for sure.
So when you guys, I mean, to be honest, I just want to ask about the ostrich egg again. Was that part of the auction? That is actually amazing.
It was. The auctioneer was a family friend of the Prices, and he had ostriches, and he'd brought along a crate full of ostrich eggs.
I remember him in his bidding voice saying, "There's 12 chicken eggs in this, ladies and gentlemen. This is well worth your time to get behind this one."
That's honestly brilliant. When you guys obviously made the move over to the UK, and when Toddy came back, it was sort of the chance for you all to ride on teams together. Janelle, you made your championship debut in London alongside him. I think I'm right in saying that. You'd been reserved previously, but what kind of experience was that? Because your first Olympic Games, and you're alongside a man who is a double Olympic champion. That must have been a huge help.
Yeah, it certainly was. And, I remember when we first came to England, New Zealand eventing was in a little bit of a lost patch. I think, he just retired, and we were sort of really slightly struggling throughout those few years. So when he made a return, I think it was about 2008 or just before it must have been, because he went to Beijing, he really sort of created a resurgence again, and it was scary how reliant New Zealand was on him. We really were still very reliant on him, had missed him for those few years, and he brought back the team spirit and a bit of drive and some etiquette within the team, cohesion, and and drove through to London, where of course we got the bronze medal. For me personally, I was I only just got that fifth spot. I was really on the fringe trying to get there, and it was a massive thing to get the call up. I remember being so surprised and excited all at once, right down to he rode my horse a bit. He sort of took me under his wing and actually took the horse for a couple of weeks. The dressage was a week phase for the horse, Flint Star, and he actually took the horse for a couple of weeks and rode him for me. And then I actually had a bit of an incident sort of 5 weeks out from the games and couldn't ride for a couple of weeks. And
that's another story, Nicole.
I was going to say, it's kind of a testament to your character, and and being able to, because you did suffer a bit of an injury pre-London that could have easily put you out of your first Olympics.
Yeah, absolutely. And he, it's pretty unique. He took my horse. He even took him to Aachen. We ended up, he took the individual spot and just went to Aachen and did 2 phases to sort of put the horse back in a top environment and help my preparation. So, I mean, there wouldn't be many teams in the world where one rider would take on another's horse in the lead up to an Olympic Games and, take it to a world-class event and do 2 phases for them. So, yeah, it was pretty special times.
And in terms of, you've said that actually New Zealand eventing was a little bit lost without him before his comeback in 2008. What do you think the legacy is now? Because New Zealand eventing is pretty strong at the moment. You've got a lot of very, very good combinations. There's some competition for team places. And where do you think the team position is now? Is it very much going, do you know what? We haven't managed to do it and get that Olympic gold medal with Toddy on the team. We want to go out there and do it for him.
Yeah, I think if we did, it would definitely, he has a significant part to play in that all coming together, and in a way he's run out of time because of things that are against him. He's not a young man, and that's just the way it is. But I wouldn't have any doubt that if he had another cycle in him, Olympic cycle in him, then he would be part of that success if that success was to come about. But without him, it's definitely everything that has been ploughed into this team in the last 4, 8, 12 years is just thanks to him and his influence and things, and we'll take that forward and try and turn that into success. So he's living, he's a living, breathing part of everything that we represent, really. And
we certainly, we know what he did for us, and we sort of endeavour to do that for, it is a time of change now. We've got some young riders that are trying to make the move as we once did, and, we'll sort of try and do to them what he's done for us.
Obviously, I think he mentioned something in Campfire that he wouldn't be stepping away from eventing entirely. Obviously, he has his racing commitments, and I've absolutely no doubt that he's going to be hugely successful there, just as he has been in eventing. But is there a chance that he will stay involved in New Zealand team eventing?
I would say that yeah, he did allude to that, didn't he? And I think that would be definitely the case. He's not a man to sit still. He is intrinsically involved with eventing. I don't think he'll want to give that away altogether. And it will be very interesting because it will be the first time that we've seen him get involved potentially without actually being a rider himself.
Well, that's not quite true.
No,
he was a trainer at Athens. He was a very bad trainer. So
watch this. It'll be a matter of watch this space, won't it? Because he might be in a different capacity to trainer.
He was a bit irresponsible back in those days. Maybe he's grown up a bit.
I feel like there's a story here. What happened?
He was just like a kid in a lolly shop. He was like. He'd just exploded into the retirement stage of his life, and so no. But I think this time round would be he could have a really good part to play, whether it's more of an in the administrative side of the sport with the Kiwis, or whether he whatever his capacity might be. I think it would be quite interesting to see now that he has. I think he's not going to come back, is he?
No.
So I think now that he's properly stepped aside and he's a proper.
But his heart has to be in it. Anything his heart is in, he will give 150% to. If he believes in somebody, he will completely back them. And, going back to slightly joking, when he was a trainer at Athens, I don't think his heart was in it. But, things are different now. And, it's not to say we wouldn't see him in that role or a different role. But, I know now he's probably a bit more selective about what he takes, and provided he believes in it, he will give it everything.
And just to make it clear, he is a very good trainer, and we've used him a lot over the years. We box up our horses and take them around to his place and work away with them, and we've benefited hugely from what he's done for us.
I have absolutely no doubt. And there, even just going back to the story about Flintstar going to Aachen with him, I mean, that sort of generosity and the trust on both camps is absolutely huge. And I think it is testament that we've spoken to a lot of people on this podcast that have had horses with him, that have trained him, that have been teammates of his, that have been his competitors. And the common theme from every single person is very much his generosity, the fact that he is a true team player, the fact that he is one of the sport's really, really good guys. So what are you guys going to miss most about him in terms of obviously having him as a teammate and a fellow competitor?
His ability to ignite a party out of nothing. No, I mean, it's just...
I mean, that's a very, very valued, a hugely valued quality in a person, to be honest.
Of the whole journey, Nicole. And like
Absolutely.
When you're in the doldrums after, what happened at the Rio Olympics, and you're stuck in Brazil, I mean, what can you do? You can mope around the place, or you can get on with, like,
drowning your sorrows,
getting amongst we created a song that was all at the hands of Toddy that night, the Sunday night, and we created a song that just it just emphasized all the elements of how we'd failed, and we got over it.
We always were united in winning and united in losing. But he is a brilliant example of someone that was so professional, but great fun to have around. And he could have a drink at night, and he'd still be the first one up in the morning and training all day. His work ethic has been incredible. I'll definitely miss cooking alongside him. So often at a 3-day we'll park up together, and we'll often have a conflab on the Wednesday or something before we go to the supermarket and decide what we're going to cook during the week. But it's just all those little, outside of the riding hours, the socialising, and just being a general all-round top bugger.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, he will be massively missed. That's for sure. No, he's the other thing I would just add to what Janelle said is he's always been brutally honest, and just talking back to what we would like to pass on down to the future youngsters that come through, and something that was sometimes quite hard to take with Mark, because it was to the bone, but it was his brutal honesty with where you were at, and we were on the receiving end of that quite regularly as we were coming through, and it shook you a little bit. And then we've been, to his side in recent years, and I've seen him give that same sort of service to some of the young guys coming through as we have a meeting, in recent times, and you go, whoa, actually, I remember that being me just a few years ago, as he towers across the table and says, well, you need to do this. And, that's the sort of thing that just makes him a special man, and we will, hopefully take on forwards with him.
I think what is very apparent is he has very much left a legacy in New Zealand eventing, and in eventing as a whole, to be honest, not just with New Zealand, because he has been a huge part of the sport for so many years, and we only hope that he will continue to be a huge part of the sport. But Tim, Janelle, thank you so much, because it has been a real pleasure to talk to you both about him and how he's had an impact on your careers as well. And I'm hoping I'm going to be able to twist your arms to come back and tell us the Price story as well.
We'll
we can do that. But no, and it's just been such an honour to be associated with the great man. We've always considered ourselves very lucky to come from the same country and to be able to share a lot of our careers with him. It's not something we've ever taken for granted, and it's just something about him and everything that precedes him and who he is that we feel very honoured. So yeah, I agree. It'll be great to see him in the sport for years to come in some capacity, and I'm sure we will, because he is, it's in his veins. So yeah, we look forward to the future and see what it might hold.
We'll watch this space. Tim, Janelle, thank you very, very much, and we will look forward to hearing from you again very, very soon.
Okay, so we've heard from lots of different people in Mark's life, and for a lot of them, it's sort of easy to prepare, whether you're an owner, whether you're a teammate, it's there's a reasonably set amount of questions you could ask. This one is different. This one could go anywhere. I'm delighted to be joined by someone who I think will give us a little bit of the personal side of behind the scenes of Sir Mark Todd. I'm joined by Brendan Corskadden. Now, Brendan, I introduced Pete Cattell purely by reference to Di Brunsden and being the other half of Di and Pete fame. You are, of course, the other half of Sally Corskadden, team manager of Team Ireland. But you're also very close to Mark from a friend point of view, and actually so much so that you were best man back in the 80s. Tell us a little bit about the real Todd, and edit yourself as you wish.
The first time I ever saw Mark Todd, I think I was a spectator at badminton. It was 79 or 80, around that sort of time. He was riding Southern Comfort, and I saw him jumping some fences on the cross country, and I thought he did it in such a different style and with such a dash. I thought, this man is either completely mad or he's brilliant. So luckily it turned out he actually was brilliant. We met shortly after that and hit it off straight away. And we've basically been friends for 40 years, I suppose.
How did you manage to maneuver yourself into, very close friendship by the mid-80s? Was it purely through the horses, or was that how it began?
Purely through the horses, yeah. In the early 80s, I used to come to England with a couple of horses and event, and would base myself with Mark. We just became great friends. Always have been. Then when he got married in 1986, he asked me to be his best man. That was a hell of a trip because he invited several riders out to ride in Pukekohe event. So Doc Love, Eric Devander, Clissy Strawn, Rodney Powell, Jane Starkey and Melanie Duff all appeared and rode at the event. Went to the wedding then a couple of days after, and then 10 of us went on the honeymoon with them. I'm not sure Carolyn was over impressed, but it was great fun.
Where was that?
That was in New Zealand.
Okay.
The wedding was in Wellington. Yeah. So when that was all over, a few years later, then I got married, and Mark was my best man.
Oh, neat. Okay, nice.
I can remember he was always late. I can remember standing in the aisle. I had to get a substitute best man because it looked like he wasn't turning up. And then in a crowded church, he eventually comes trotting up the aisle, straightening his tie in the nick of time.
Before Sally, I presume.
Yes, just before. Just before.
Now, we'll often see Sally at the events, traipsing around, keeping everything organized from a team point of view. In more recent years, we'll usually see Mark somewhere between entertaining and competing. And you'll usually be kind of somewhere in between the two, sitting kind of quietly, or what appears to be quietly, at the end of a bench, or somewhere with a kind of a grin on your face in the middle of
social coordinator.
Social coordinator, absolutely. So give us a little bit of what it's like being at an event with Mark from the social point of view.
Initially, I would go and rock up at the Badmintons and the Burleys of this world and throw my bag into Mark's truck and sort of spend the week there. In the old days, he never really got nervous as such, but like I said, he was always late. So in the old days, he would, on cross-country morning, for instance, he'd be sat in the lorry, would be having a laugh about things, he'd be drinking coffee, and his way of easing his nerves, he'd get up and start dusting and hoovering and cleaning. So we used to call him Widow Twanky. Then there'd be a knock on the door, and the groom would be standing outside with a tacked-up horse. And she'd say, Mark, you better get in this horse, you better start in 10 minutes. Then there'd be a panic. He'd have to find his number bib, his spurs, run out, jump on the horse and head off, and invariably would sort of be inside the time, clear, God knows what. But that's going back a bit now.
I presume there've been some big. There's been lots of big wins in his career. But I presume there's been some big celebrations. Were you there for the Olympic wins?
No, I never made it to any of the Olympic wins. I was there for a lot of badmintons and Burleys. No, never made it to the Olympics.
I mean, I've asked other people about the the biggest wins for their horses and like favorite memories and that kind of thing. And I think you probably fall into the same category. But were there any particularly big or good celebrations or stories that stand out from that side of his life?
For me, the biggest win I felt, and sort of the most emotional win, was when he made his comeback. And there were lots of people, sort of well-meaning people, said, "Oh God, should Mark be coming back because the sport has changed, and it's a lot different to what it used to be." And when he made the comeback that time and won badminton on Land Vision, for me that was the best. That was a bit like Lester Piggott winning the Breeders' Cup on Royal Academy. That was big celebrations. That was great.
One of the things we talked about as well, I mean, on top of all of the wins and on top of the emotion, was actually Sunday. And, I think people close to him obviously had an idea that this was potentially coming soon. But when we were talking to Pete, we talked about the emotion of Sunday. And, for someone who's been so close to Mark for such a long period of his career, how did you find that announcement? I mean, in one sense, I guess it changes less for you in that your relationship doesn't change, and your social relationship doesn't change very much in terms of having Mark at the events. But it was an emotional day.
It was an extraordinary day. I went down to see him before his show jumping, and he said, "This is going to be my last event. I'm going to retire now." And he said, "But don't say anything, because I'm not going to do it until I get home. I don't want to have to make a speech because I won't be able to talk." So I said nothing. Then a few minutes later, I look around and everybody's in tears. And so the groom was crying, Jess was in tears, lots of other people were. So it was obvious that word was out at this stage. I went over to Mark and he was in floods of tears. And he had to get up to go in for the prize giving. So he said, "Have you got a hanky?" So I'm one of these old-fashioned people who carries a handkerchief. Gave him a handkerchief. He cleaned himself up and in they go. Then they announced the retirement and they made him do a lap of honour. And as he cantered past, I started blubbing and crying. Then went to reach for a handkerchief and remembered he had the bloody thing. It was incredibly emotional, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think once he said it and got it over with, I think he was relieved.
Now, I mean, I don't know if you're going to answer me, but what was there? I mean, there was a lot of wild parties. Can you give us any of them? Can you just give us a nod towards some of them? I mean, they're stuff of legend, but I mean, it's hard to know it's hard to know if they're real or not.
Oh yes. Yeah, they were real. There were so many of them. There was, especially in the early days, there's so many. Yeah, I look back on it all, and it's sort of 40 years of laughter, really, and partying, quite honestly, with a few gold medals and badminton and Burleys thrown in. But basically, it's just 40 years of laughter. Yeah, it's been amazing.
Yeah, I knew we weren't going to get the wild stories out of you, Brendan. That's probably why. That's probably why you're a friend. But yeah, I mean, 40 Years of Laughter is a lovely title for a book. But deep down, I just feel there's something else. There's more to it. But I'm not going to press you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for giving a little bit of insight onto this side of the journey. And we will look forward to seeing you sitting mischievously at the end of a bench. I will alert people to the fact that it is you who is causing an awful lot of the carnage behind the scenes, the puppeteer, so to speak. But thanks for coming on, Brendan.
A pleasure. I told them the other day, I hope I get to be part of the next chapter.
Well, I think that's
probably
a given. Yeah, no, I'm sure it will. Great. Well, look, thanks again for coming on, and we will catch up soon.
Okay, pleasure, Graham.
Well, the next person we're going to hear from on Mark Todd is a man who's ridden on many a team with him. They've shared many medals in those team championship level as well. And it is none other, if I can get my words out, than the double world champion himself, Blythe Tate.
Hi, Nicole. How are you?
Very good. Now, I saw you at Bergam over the weekend. You were, of course, designing up there, but want to talk to you about the great man himself. Obviously, you've known him for a really long time. You both started your careers in New Zealand, but did you know him when you were out in New Zealand, or was it really when you moved over here?
I knew him a little bit, but I didn't really get to know him until I moved to the UK. Mark came up here for a number of years before me, so when I was emerging in New Zealand, I did show jump before I went eventing, and Mark was out show jumping, so I met him there, but it was really once I had moved to the UK as well that I got to know him better.
And in terms of sort of championships, I guess the first time would have been Gawler in 1986. I want to say, is that right?
You're making us sound very old. It was, because I had been selected to ride from New Zealand, and Mark was based already here in the UK, and he flew a Charisma, I think it was, down to Gawler. Unfortunately, I didn't get to compete. I had my horse, unfortunately, had a heart attack on the gullets before the event, but I did get to, be part of the New Zealand team and get to know Mark a lot better there. So that was before I came up to the UK. So, it's through those sort of opportunities that I did get to know Mark.
And in terms of when you then moved to the UK, was it a massive help having somebody over here that obviously you then were competing on teams with, that knew the lay of the ground?
Absolutely. From New Zealand in those days, it was an awful long way. It was a big deal. Both Mark and Andrew were already campaigning here and being very successful. So from my point of view, it gave me the confidence to take the step. And as soon as I got to the UK, Mark was a great source of inspiration and help to me. The very first international competition I did was in Shanti, and I went with Mark in his lorry because I didn't have a lorry of my own at that stage. So he definitely helped me along in those early days.
And what was he like to compete on a team with? Because he's a man of such experience now. He always strikes me as somebody that would be extremely good under pressure. Is that the case?
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's ridden anchorman for our team on many occasions just because of the fact that he is so solid. Once I first came here, he'd already won 2 Olympic gold medals, so he was very, very established. But he's always been, very supportive of the rest of us, and he's, we think of him as a teammate, and he's very natural and very normal. He's very entitled to be. Think he's above us, but he doesn't. He just sort of mucks in with everybody, and although I'd say that he leads us along, he certainly doesn't think he's any better than anyone else. So and he's kept that right throughout his whole career, and so for a teammate, that's exactly what you need.
I think that's probably a recurring theme, actually, among the people that we talk about him, and our experience of him is that he's this man that has won pretty much everything there is to win in eventing. And yet he is one of the nicest. I think the word you used to describe him was approachable when we spoke a minute ago. I mean, that is basically sums him up as well. Yeah,
he's always stayed like that. He hasn't really changed at all. So, his success certainly hasn't gone to his head, and he is approachable, whether it's just at a normal horse trials where people can, compete alongside him at novice level, or whether it's at a big international Olympic games or whatever. He's always been very friendly and very approachable, very easy for everyone to get along with.
What would be your highlight of riding alongside him? Is there a moment that you look back on that is something that you will always kind of pick out as?
Unfortunately for Mark, the highlights for me were at his expense, sadly, because in Atlanta, Mark was selected on KM, but KM had a muscle issue once we got to Atlanta, and I got the opportunity to come off the reserve list with Ready Teddy and go on and win gold medal. And also when I was lucky enough to win the World Championships at Rome, Mark was leading going into the show jumping and had a fence down or a couple of fences down and moved back to second behind me. But, even then we were on the same team. We won the gold in Rome as a team. I think we sort of, I got first, Mark got second, I think Andrew got fourth, or Vaughan got fourth and Andrew got fifth. So, we were very dominant at that stage. So, those are the fond memories I have when we were really gelled as a team and we were doing really well.
It was actually, to be honest, the New Zealand golden era during those sort of 1990s. I mean, even going through the 80s with the Toddy's individual gold medals in LA and Seoul in 84, 88. Actually, in terms of New Zealand eventing, must be really inspiring and have kind of paved the way for New Zealand eventers today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the fact that Mark has stayed in the sport for so long has been incredible as well, because I think I was just looking at the list of his achievements, and he won a team medal at either the London Olympics in 2012, I think it was. So,
he did, yeah.
He's been winning medals for an awful long time.
I think I'm right in saying that he equals the longest period of time between winning Olympic medals than any other Olympic athlete.
Well,
so 28 years, I think his medals span.
Wow, well, that sounds about right. I can't imagine anyone else has done it for longer.
I mean, that's just incredible, because to go to one Olympic Games and get a medal, but to go to them that many times and that far apart as an elite athlete is quite remarkable. How big of an impact is his retirement going to have on New Zealand eventing? Is it going to, I mean, it's obviously going to be a huge loss, but it's
he'll be sorely lost, and I think he's already described it as giving other people an opportunity, and there is that side of the coin. But he's been so dependable. He's been selected to virtually every championship for as long as I can remember, and that's going to leave a hole for sure. But I 100% support him in his decision, because he knows that the time is right now for him. And I know that he's going to keep busy with his racehorses. So, you can't do it forever. And he's just decided the time is right now for him.
The time is right. Well, he will be sorely missed, but thank you for talking to us about him, because
my pleasure.
You both go back a long time. You're both complete legends of the sport, and we're all lucky to have been a part of it. So thank you very much. Blythe, good luck, because you're heading back to New Zealand now. You've been over course designing and going back.
Heading back immediately, so you just caught me.
Caught you just in time. Well, thank you very much, and we'll catch up with you over in the UK very soon, but thank you.
Okay, cheers.
Well, next on the show, I'm delighted to be joined by, this intro is a hard one. World champion, Olympic champion, multiple badminton champion, Lucinda Green. Thank you for joining us. I think it's another part of Mark's life that I want to look at, and who better than to be able to discuss parts of his career than yourself. So thank you for coming on. I don't really know where to start. You know where to start. I mean, we could start at the beginning.
It's really difficult, but I tell you, I'm incredibly flattered to be asked, because Mark is something unbelievable, something very, very special. And I remember the time he first came over, he was with Jörg Zindel, a Swiss dealer, not far from where my husband and I, as he was then, David, lived. And this long-legged New Zealander turned up, and somehow we sort of ran into him once or twice. And then the next memory I have of he managed to find himself a ride to represent New Zealand in the World Games in Lexington in 1978. And that was quite amazing, to go from Jörg Zindel's yard, the dealer's yard, into the World Games, but that was the way it was. And he became quite a character, and was very good looking, and we all thought he was marvellous. And then I remember him winning badminton on Southern Comfort from way back after the dressage, which even in those days you had to be really in the top 5 or 6 to get anywhere to win badminton. You had to be in the top 5 or 6 after the dressage, and he came from way back. And his career unfolded in the most amazing way, and we sort of knew each other as competitors and mates, but not hugely profound mates. So little time, really, when you're busy at that game, to have hugely profound mates. But he then went home at the end of 2000. He went home and developed himself this new career, and I sat back in astonishment as I heard how incredibly well he was doing. Astonishment only that somebody could switch from top level in one sport to top level in another, and so quickly, but not astonishment in that he is so capable. He is such a horseman, and I think that applies to whatever you're doing. And I never forget the badminton where he got on Horton Point. I think it was on the Tuesday, and by the Sunday evening he'd won badminton on this horse. And that's the sort of man you're dealing with, somebody who instantly understands what he's riding or what he's dealing with. And therefore, it didn't surprise me really that he was such a successful trainer. And I think it was amazing that he came back. And 8 years, he rode a little differently when he came back. He rode much more defensively. He's very brave, very fast, but he's very tall body. He didn't have it quite so forward as he used to do in the later part of the last century. He had it just a little bit more ready for trouble, if you like. And he did say to me, I'm glad the courses are easier now. Coming back in 2008, I don't find them nearly as frightening as they were in the last century. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come back. And it was amazing to watch him come back. He won badminton. It was extraordinary on the grey horse. And I think he was
Land Vision, was it?
Yeah, Land Vision, exactly. He was as shocked as I was. And I remember in the collecting ring, as he came in to the prize giving, he caught my eye. He was riding in on Land Vision, and I caught his. And I just, the gesture was of just total amazement between the both of us. We'd both gone back so far and knew each other reasonably well. And it was just, we were both astonished that this had happened. And we had a particularly interesting time. I think not long before he came over, I went over to stay. They'd moved from Hamilton down to South Island, New Zealand, and he and Carolyn were sadly parting company, but they were still living in the same house. And I went to stay for a day, and we went to do a lecture together. And the drive there and the drive back were memorable for two things when we went to do this lecture. On the way there, I'll never forget him saying it, that Carolyn is the only girl I've ever loved. And on the way back on a roundabout, we were rammed into by somebody. Because he got out of the car, and then he came back a little minute later and he said, trust us to be rammed into by a deaf, mute Maori, which indeed we were. This poor man couldn't speak. And we had to untangle ourselves from having been pranged into by him. But those were two remarkable moments. And then some time ago when he was living over here, after he'd returned the second time, I had managed to get myself in a hospital with some horse had cut through my foot or something. And because it was my birthday, he came in to see me, because we used to sort of meet on my birthday since he came back, so we made sure we saw each other once a year. And he couldn't take me out to dinner because I was up in hospital, so we just had a giggle and some champagne in my hospital room. And then the next year, it might have been a couple of years later, I was sort of saying, well, what about our birthday dinner? And I didn't hear anything back. And then a few weeks later, I got a text saying, sorry, Lou, it's been rather busy over your birthday, been getting married, and sent this picture of Carolyn and him on the steps of the registry office. And that just said it all, really, to me. It was just the most perfect circle. And now here he is starting on a new life, and he's so excited by it, and Carolyn is so excited by it. I think they've probably got more now, but when I went to see them, they had 10 youngsters, sort of 18-month-old, that they'd been to 3 Breeze Up sales and bought, and some good owners already. And how right those owners are, because that man is just amazing, successful from start to finish.
Yeah, I think it definitely, and we were talking about it with Brendan, that actually, while it's, Sunday was a very emotional day for lots of people at Campfire, and then, subsequent to that, as the news kind of leaked out all around the world. But it also kind of feels, certainly from what Mark has said as well, that there definitely is an element of relief as he looks forward to, the next part of his journey. Can we go back, Lucinda, to where would we say, maybe, so I guess around the time when he moves over, let's say just before those 1978 games, which, feels like a starting point. If we remind ourselves, even just this was a period of huge success for you. I think what Mark Phillips had you could, I think, say probably dominated badminton at that point, and we had obviously much less 5 stars or 4 stars as they were then, but much less top level competition. So these were really big markers in terms of, I suppose, where the sport was. You had a period, your first with Be Fair in 1973,
Very
but
good.
your period of success, say 76, 77. Mark wins badminton on Southern Comfort in 1980, and then you have Regal Realm and Beagle Bay subsequent to that. I think you were also, when did Mark? I think Mark won an individual gold at the Olympics when you had a team gold. Period.
No, unfortunately, the Americans got us, and we had team silver in '84, and he had individual gold, and then 4 years later, the whole thing happened again. Not with us, and at that point being team silver because we didn't do so well, but he was gold individual 2 Olympics in a row, and by that time I was commentating on him. The first time I'd been competing with him, and the second time I was commentating on him. It was the same horse, same man, same braille show jumping manner that Charisma had. He jumped by braille, and how he ever got those clear rounds was the genius of the pair of them with their partnership.
But I mean, at this whole point of your career, you were quite linked in terms of, you were at the very top of the game. He was now starting to emerge, and then into the 80s, he was at the very top of the sport. He
was so much more at the top of the sport than I was at that point. He was commanding such incredible respect, Olympics, badminton, whatever. He was winning.
I mean, was there ever a rivalry? I think he's won.
I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah, he's won 11.
I don't know how he made things in his mind work, but I've often discovered that men have a different way of looking at achieving than I did. And I don't like to say women because I don't know how women work, but my idea was always just to do my very best. And I was actually hot favorite with Regal Realm to win the gold medal in Los Angeles. And I think I came 6th, and I could only be delighted because my horse had done his very best in all 3 phases. There were 5 others better than us on the weekend. So there was never really any jealousy or rivalry. My ambition had always been to do my best. And I don't know what his was, but usually I imagine to win again and again. And I never know how I managed to win 6 badmintons because I never set out to do that. I just wanted to do my best.
I mean, it was very special. It still remains very special. 6 different horses. Tell me about, now as we look back, two great periods for Mark in the sport. We've talked about the influence you've had previously, Ginny as well, and then into kind of Pippa and people like Karen O'Connor in the States as we've gone through the different eras. Mark, in terms of his influence on the sport, obviously the longevity is going to play a huge role in this, but not just how he'll be remembered, but he has had a massive influence on this sport and will continue to do so.
I think one of the major influences he's had is he made New Zealand possible. I mean, they are an extraordinarily talented race. I teach there from time to time, and I'm always saying you are the most gifted natural event riders I've seen, cross-country riders. And he sort of opened the door and made it possible for these extraordinary sportsmen that New Zealand is. 4.8 million people in the whole country, and they produce rugby teams, event teams, cricket teams. They are phenomenal. And he made that possible. So that was a huge influence because New Zealand has been enormous on our little sports world stage. And usually cracking good riders have come out of there. And I think he influenced tremendously the art of horsemanship. That you didn't hear stories about him doing naughty things or being cruel to his horses. You heard horsemanship and you saw horsemanship. I will never forget Gandalf, the horse that he came back to ride in the 208 Olympic Games on almost on a bet one evening. I bet you can't ride in the Olympic Games next year or whatever. And he took it on and he bought Gandalf. And I went to ride Gandalf after he'd come back, a long time after the Games. There's an article for the Horse and Hound or something. And I couldn't ride one side of him. Couldn't get him on the bit. I could hardly get him into a straight line for a fence. And I thought, yet again, if I needed to have it proved yet again, here was this extraordinary man who could just get on anything and make the very best of it.
I think it all? I'm just looking at this picture here of you and Gandalf as you're talking about it, and it says you're also did something with Toy Town and Galon de Sauvier.
Correct. I did go over to France and ride that lovely grey horse. He was a spitfire.
Yeah, cool.
Toy Town was just gorgeous, through and through gorgeous. I sort of felt he was rideable, whereas Gandalf really, really was not easy. But then Mark, I've always wondered what it was that made Mark such a brilliant competitor and a brilliant rider. Obviously, he had a great desire to do the job well, but I always felt he had an ability with his very, very long legs and not such a tall, long body to put a horse in balance in a way that probably the rest of us didn't find we could do. And he just gave a horse a sort of feeling of, I can do this, because he just managed to, through his own body, put that horse in such a beautiful balance. And I'm really talking about bombing down to the cross-country fences. But then he went off show jumping at top level around the time of the Seoul Olympics. And he was on a trotter who actually put in a stride of trot every now and again before 1 meter 60 oxer or treble combination. And he didn't score hugely on that, but he got to the Olympic Games in show jumping, which is no mean feat. I just felt that he had this fantastic feel, touch, balance. Balance was the word that kept coming back to me as I tried to work out what on earth he did that was so much better than the rest of us.
When we've been talking to everybody, there's probably everybody obviously talks about the talent, but before long, Pete talked about the generosity of his time and also just his welcoming nature into the world of eventing. The second thing people have talked about a lot is the parties and the fun. And I think Brendan described it as 40 years of laughter that they've had together as they've been part of the sport. Were you part of the party scene, or did you go to bed early?
I was a pretty boring old fart, actually. I didn't really like the all-night bits. So I left them to it, the boys, and whatever girls were brave enough. And rather boringly used to creep off to bed. So no, I never could do partying. I could do 12 hours a day flat out, but I couldn't do 24. And his stamina was incredible. And yes, he absolutely never ever wasn't prepared to help if you wanted any help. He'd walk any course, help you with any horse, and he was always, I totally concur with that, generous with his time or his advice or his discussion or whatever.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, look, thank you for coming on. Thank you for giving us a closer look.
No, it's a pleasure. I'm honoured to be asked. Thank you.
Well, it is a very fitting end to what has been a very special show, because we have none other than the man himself with Derm and I. Welcome to the Eventing Podcast, Sir Mark Todd.
Thank you, Nicole.
Oh, it's so good to have you on. We have spoken to a lot of your friends, a lot of your colleagues over the last few days. They have all been absolutely lovely about you. We've got a few stories in there as well. We are recording this on Wednesday. Campfire was on Sunday. Has it sunk in?
I don't think so, no, because, really it's just sort of been life as normal. But the only thing, the first morning I got home and got up and went to do the horses, and I just thought, oh yes, no more sitting trot, no more having to go into that big sand pit out there and go around in circles. So it was a huge relief.
No more dressage. Do you feel like there is that sense of relief? Because if you knew it was coming, but you hadn't sort of quite decided when it was coming, to have that decision made that you can kind of actually take a breath?
Yeah, no, it was, because, we sort of agonized over it for ages and, for most of this year, really. And then once I'd finally made the decision that I would stop this year, then I actually couldn't wait to stop. And every competition I went to, I thought, oh God, is this the one that's, one too many? So, and then when Campfire came up, which was sort of fairly late, deciding to go there and take all the horses there, and they were doing a Nations Cup, it seemed a fitting end. And really, I would have stopped no matter what had happened. But, for the New Zealand team to win the Nations Cup, it wasn't quite an Olympic medal, but any win's a good win. It seemed the perfect time to finish.
I think, Nicole, on the New Zealand point, I think it's a really interesting one because it has been a big part of the show in terms of people that we've spoken to, and even going back to the 78 games, Mark, one of the things that's come across in terms of, I guess in what people have been saying, and in terms of, I know it's difficult to talk about yourself in terms of a legacy, but certainly one of the things which has come across really strongly is that, that initial move from, I think, Jorg Zindel's yard to get to a World Equestrian Games. Of all of the Kiwi riders who have followed, a huge amount have credited that initial breakthrough from you and, normalizing eventing and normalizing success and making it feel like something they could do. How proud of you or how proud are you, I should say, of everything which has followed you from a New Zealand point of view in eventing?
Well, when you do the sport, you don't do it thinking about, what sort of legacy you're leaving behind. You do it hoping to do the best you can, and there was 5 of us that went to the 78 World Championships straight out of New Zealand, and green as you like. And then obviously, I carried on in Europe and did whatever I did. But it's only when, I certainly haven't read everything on Facebook or Twitter or everything, but some of the comments that have come across, it just makes you realize, and I hadn't realized that, some of the things that you do, how much they influence people's lives. And I mean, and just by being there, competing, winning competitions and keeping going, people get sort of inspiration from that. And that's something that I hadn't really realized, not even after I retired the first time.
Do you think, obviously we've heard from a lot of people on this podcast as to how you've had an influence on theirs, but coming from your peers and people that you have ridden on teams with and at the top level of the sport, that are your competitors, that are your people that you compete against on a day-to-day basis, even then going on to compete with them at championships, do you think that adds an extra bit of something special? Because you almost have got, there has been such an outpouring. And you said when we came on, it's not like I've died. Well, it's not, but it's almost like, I'm not going to say it's almost like you have died, but you're alive to witness it. But it is almost a little bit like that, because
well, it's a little bit like being at your own funeral.
But in a nice way.
People saying nice things. I'm sure there's a few out there that would like to say something not so nice, but luckily they haven't spoken up yet. But no, I mean, it is amazing, and it's very humbling. Like I said, you don't do this setting out to influence people or whatever, but knowing that you have and hearing and seeing what people have said, it's very humbling, and
it means a lot.
Yeah.
In terms of obviously deciding to call it a day this year, you said you'd decided on this year. How much of a decision was that in terms of Tokyo 2020? How much of a pull was Tokyo to try and go and get another Olympic gold medal?
Well, most of my top horses are getting a bit like me, a bit long in the tooth and what have you. And Tokyo, although it's only 12 months ago to go, it just seemed like an awful long time. And I honestly didn't know that I could put the work in and the dedication needed to, I didn't want to just go, I don't want to go to the Olympics and just say, oh, I've been there. And now that they're down to 3, it'd be even worse if I did stick on for a year and then got left off the team. So that'd be really, really bad. So, I think it was mostly a selfish decision on my own part, but also in fairness to the owners of the horses and other people that are trying to get on the New Zealand team. I just felt it was best for me not to go to another Olympics. And quite frankly, I have no desire to sort of, I've been to 7, I think. Another one more wasn't really going to make much difference. And if I went there thinking that I had a possibility of winning a medal, then that would have been something. But the way I was feeling, I just didn't think it was going to happen.
In terms of obviously your life in the equestrian industry, you've been doing the racehorses for a few years now. When you were over in New Zealand in sort of retirement, first time around, they became a big part of your life. How excited are you to kind of have a little bit more free reign? You had some really cool opportunities at the start of this year in terms of running them abroad. How much of a kind of a buzz does that give you now?
Well, it's like, I've got 10 new horses in the stable. Some of them are half of them are 2-year-olds, and it's like, it's like having new toys. It's just great. And I always wanted to be a jockey when I was a little kid. I wanted to be a jockey, so racing has always been there, and that's why we turned to breeding and training racehorses when we went back to New Zealand. But I mean, it's also the fact that I love riding. I love being on horses, and I love competing. And obviously, I was too big to be a jockey, so that's why I've done competition horses. But that I couldn't keep doing that forever. And I love challenges, and this is a new challenge. Can I train horses over here to win decent races? I don't want to be just winning races at minor tracks around here. That doesn't do anything for me. But if I can have a horse good enough to run at Ascot or Newmarket and some of the bigger races, that would be a dream.
I think that's a really special piece around it to look forward to. Before we go, Mark, to look back at a couple of the horses, because I know that certainly what's come across to us in the way that you mentioned almost how you can inspire people without realizing you're doing it. I think one of the things that we picked up on the Flick group, Nicole, when we talked about charisma on
everybody,
yeah.
Honestly, every single person has a story to tell about charisma.
Yeah, we asked questions about him, and I mean, some of the stories are just that. Did you go on a tour of New Zealand with charisma, or did you make some appearances with charisma post those Olympic victories?
He went on a tour with his groom Helen Gilbert at the time, because I had to come back to the UK, and he went on a tour around the country, and I mean, he was an amazing little horse. I mean, still when I watch. Not that I watch them very often, but every now and again they appear on Facebook or whatever, videos of him. It's still sort of, or if I have to talk about him, it still chokes me up a bit. He was a very special little horse, and he just loved being in front of the public. He loved. I can tell you quite a funny story. He got invited to visit the Miss Waikato beauty pageant in New Zealand. And he was cut late. I think it's a 4-year-old, and he sired, I think, 4 or 5 progeny. Anyway, aged 20 whatever, he went up on the stage with all these beauty queens, whatever, and got an erection.
Life in the old boy,
yes. All these girls were blushing all over.
Oh dear, he does. Is he the horse? Looking back on your career, you've had some great horses. Is he the one that stands out the most for you, or is that asking you to pick your favourite child?
Yeah, no, it is. He was right at the beginning of my career, and there's only 2 other horses in history that have won back-to-back gold medals, and so that's pretty special. And he had a weakness, and that was the show jumping, and the fact that he didn't actually manage to win one of the big ones here in England was a crying shame, really. But anyway, that's what it was. But he's definitely the horse that I'm most recognised for, anyway. Probably around the world. If people were asked to name a horse that I rode, they'd probably say Charisma.
One of the questions we were talking to people about, and one of the things I spoke to Brendan about, and I think Pete as well, was around the particular victories which stood out, or the emotional victories, because I think all of us have been touched by the sport in a different way. And I think, looking back on some of your wins, they both looked probably to the comeback time and to coming back and the wins which followed that. And I think the Land Vision win has come up a number of times, the badminton win. Was there one in particular which stood out, or was there a particular time when you felt you were enjoying it most, or that, you know, most connected to it, or you know, that those wins meant a huge amount?
Well, you know, any of those big wins is special, and they're all different. Like, you know, when I rode Horton Points and won on him at Badminton, I'd only sat on him on the Tuesday of Badminton, and the Bevan family, you know, they'd sold their home to keep their horses going, and so, you know, winning that made a huge difference to them, and that was like a fairy tale, really. So that was pretty amazing. And yeah, you've mentioned Land Vision's win. You know, for me to come back after 8 years away from the sport, and that's one thing I remember with Lucinda. I mean, when I came out of the ring from the show jumping, Lucinda was standing there, and all I could do was just shrug my shoulders, and it was like, you know, how the hell did that happen? And of course the very first one, you know, when I went on Southern Comfort back in 1980, and
you were 45th after dressage.
Yeah, but you could do that then back then.
Lucinda says you couldn't. Lucinda said that was rare, and she was favourite for it, and I think she knocked a pole.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, she knocked a pole. But funnily enough, Blythe Tate was here last night, and a couple of others, and we were talking about it. And I think at one Olympics, he was with oh God, I can't remember the name of the horse. Barcelona Olympics. I think he was near last after the dressage and ended up winning it. So it could be done. But yeah, no, that badminton win was well, it was a shock, really. I mean, as was the first Olympic win. Nobody expected it.
It's quite remarkable. We were talking about this on the podcast after the news broke, that your career has been at the top level, spanning two very different eras of the sport, and you've done something that nobody else has ever done. Which did you prefer? Did you have a preference as to how eventing was, how it is now? It's obviously changed massively.
I mean, it has, and it was almost like two different sports. You know, if I'm honest, the old format, the old long format, to me was a true test of horsemanship, and it was more difficult in some ways, and we had different sorts of horses to what we have now. You know, the thoroughbred was very much the king in those days. But the format today is certainly much friendlier on horses, and they last longer, and you don't get quite so many injuries and what have you. So, you know, you got to move with the times, and
very different sports.
They're two very different sports. Yeah.
Just before we let you go, because we do really appreciate your time, obviously attention in your eyes will now turn to the racing, and if the podcast listeners would like to follow along with a couple of horses in your yard, who should they look out for? What would you say to them? Right, keep an eye on that one. Have a little sneaky bet.
Well, I'm having my first runner on Saturday, but I was sort of pushed into running him there, so I wouldn't be totally confident of how he's going to go. I've got a little filly who's going to have her first start probably in a couple of weeks, and she's called Petite Bay. I think she'll be running over too short a distance when she first lines up on the 14th, but she could be one worth following. And I've got a lovely big Siuni 2-year-old. He'll probably have a run as a 2-year-old towards the end of the season. He's called See You Then, but I think as a 3-year-old he will be quite a smart horse. But at the moment, they're all unraced and they're all champions till they prove otherwise.
That is the way to look at it. Well, listeners, there you go, Petite Bay and See You Then, which is a very apt name, because it has been quite an incredible journey, and we are lucky to have been along to witness it. So thank you very much. I have to admit, one of my memories is because I grew up with you as one of my idols, so I will quite openly be a fangirl about it. But in the Event Rider Masters commentary box back in, God, it must have been 2017, and Marcio George was going cross country, and I have never called Marcio George Marcio Jorge before in my life, but somebody had told me that's what it was, and I believed them. And you just looked at me, and I remember the look straight in my eye. It's not Jorge, it's George. And I was like,
George.
Oh my God.
I remember that.
Yes, I remember it too. I'm blushing just thinking about it. I'm not going to lie.
We still quote it to Nicole all of the time. It's George. And
George.
Everybody just looked at Nicole. I was the same. It was, I think the first time I met you, Mark, I had no background.
No idea
really
who I was.
Well, actually, that's true. I was put sitting in between yourself and Lucinda at a badminton commentary box, and we were talking about, I think, one of Asti and Nicola's horses which were coming in, and it was the first day of Echo ratings, the first day that we were public, and I remember sitting in between the two of you, and you guys were talking about what they looked like, and I was telling you the numbers, and I think probably from both myself and Nicole, who were, you know, starting off in commentary and doing little bits at that time, I think we both benefited massively from the generosity of your time and the welcome that you gave us. It actually makes a huge difference, the way that you looked after us then. And so thank you from us as well. And we will look forward to seeing you very soon, I hope, back at track, standing watching.
I'm not going to disappear completely. And
he's not dead,
I know he's not dead.
Thank you guys too for, you know, what you do for the sport is brilliant. You've brought a whole new dimension to us, and it's great.
No, great, thank you.
Well, Mark, thank you very, very much. We wish you all the very best. We will be following your journey, and we can't thank you enough for the memories along the way. It's been emotional, but ladies and gentlemen,
yeah, it has been emotional, but I can promise you there will be no more comebacks.
Is this it now? This is definitely it.
Yeah.
100%. Well, thank you very much.
If I do, come and hit me over the head.
We'll play this clip back to you going, you said you weren't going to do it.
Yeah.
You said you weren't going to do it. But thank you very much. Good luck. And we will see you back out and about, I'm sure, eventing very soon. But good luck with the racing as well. And listeners, there you go. You've got your 2 Mark Todd tips to look out for.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys.
Oh my God, damn. Do you feel as emotional as I feel after that?
I thought I was going to start crying there at one point. I was like, thank God Nicole is on this podcast. I was like, oh God, imagine I was on this on my own. No, you did very well there, Nicole. Thanks for that. Yeah, well played, my lord.
He is just a legend. You know, we all know it. He is one of the nicest people as a person as well as a competitor. And I think what this has kind of shown is that everybody else thinks so too. The amount of respect that is there is absolutely massive. And he is going to be a huge loss to eventing. But as he says, he's not dead.
Yeah, critical thing to remember. I think it's actually, you know, one of the things that comes across on the podcast with the different people we interview, and with also the, you know, with the people who listen to it, and the conversations we get to have, is how special the sport is and how much we love the sport. And in lots of ways, Mark embodies that, you know, in that I think you would probably say the same about people who we've had on the show. So people like Lucinda, people like Blythe. It's sometimes easy to forget that you're talking to, hanging around with, have the opportunity to, you know, have a drink with. We've been lucky enough to do that at a couple of events, do commentaries with, and then get on a podcast at, you know, 10 o'clock at night and get to talk about, you know, their career. Mark is, just an embodiment of what makes this sport so special and why we love it. And I don't think there's any higher compliment really you can have.
No, absolutely. And the key thing is he is still going to stay involved, I think, in eventing, but also in the equestrian industry. The racehorses that he's given you to follow, watch them, because let's be honest, Sir Mark Todd is not going to do anything if he can't do it properly. So watch out if he will have those runners at Ascot and the big races in the future. But for now, I think the only thing left to say on this podcast is thank you, Mark, for everything you've done for eventing, for everything that you have done for the sport. And we're really very grateful. We're lucky to have been able to be part of it. And it's been an absolute pleasure. So we hope you've enjoyed this Mark Todd special episode, and let us know what you think. Get in touch. Send us your favourite Toddy memories, and put them on social media, Facebook, at Echo Ratings, at Eventing Podcast. We would love to hear them. But the main thing is, for now, that is all we've got time for. We hope you've enjoyed the Sir Mark Todd special. Thank you for listening to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. This podcast is available for free on iTunes, Spotify, Podcast Addict, or wherever you usually listen to your podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Find us at eventingpodcast.com or search Eventing Podcast on social media.